All right, folks, hello. We are going to go ahead and get started as the last couple of people trickle in. Thank you so much for being here today for our talk as part of the Science Communication Education Research Network. Our network is part of an NSF Coordination Award aimed at improving science communication education through research and practice. We bring together scholars and practitioners from education, sciences, and communications disciplines to exchange knowledge on ways to improve the future of science communication. We're particularly focused on building the field of science communication education and establishing effective training for the next generation of science communicators to build bridges across a polarized society. Today, we are incredibly excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Shannon Behrman. She's a scientist turned storyteller and educator. Dr. Behrman is the Senior Director of Education at the Science Communication Lab, SCL, a nonprofit that creates first-person films to humanize science and make it more relevant, relatable, and accessible. Working with educators across the K through 16 spectrum, she develops SCL's film-based learning experiences and studies their impact on student outcomes related to motivation and persistence in science. She holds a bachelor's degree in plant biology from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Ph.D. in cell biology from the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Behrman will be presenting a talk entitled My Ancestors Were Scientists: How First-Person Film Narratives Support Science Identity and Nature of Science Learning. Without further ado, I am happy to turn things over to Dr. Behrman.
Hi, everybody. I might sound a little weird because I'm getting over a sinus infection. So if you hear some weird noises, I apologize. It's been a brutal season for germs. It's like I've had like three different things since January. So I'm hoping the rest of the year is better. Before I launch my presentation, I just kind of want to meet everyone in this room today. And so I was hoping if you wouldn't mind sharing who you are in this room. We are going to talk about science identity today. So I was wondering if you could let me know, what's your identity? Are you a scientist? Are you an educator? Are you a communicator or a researcher? Or some combination of all of that, or something entirely different? So if you can just let me know in the chat who you are, I would love to meet you. We have some shy folks. Awesome. Science communication researcher, microbiology professor. Yes. Hi, Liz. Anyone else? Awesome. Science educator and science education researcher. Wonderful. That's great. Awesome. Wow. Global Science of Learning Education Network. Great. Lots of educators and communicators and science communication researchers. These are my people. So I'm going to launch my presentation, if I can just find it. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so my identity overlaps with many of you all. As Erin mentioned, I'm a scientist turned storyteller, turned educator. About 20 years ago, which is really hard for me to fathom, I discovered my love for storytelling and science teaching as a grad student at UCSF. And so I continue to bring that passion into the work that I do today at the Science Communication Lab, where I get to partner with teachers to integrate and test films and hands-on activities for inclusive science learning. And so, as Erin mentioned, I'm at the Science Communication Lab, and we're a nonprofit based in Berkeley, made up of filmmakers, artists, educators, and scientists. And our mission is really to center the human stories of science through film-based learning experiences. And these films often explore who scientists are, how science works, and why science matters in our lives and our communities. So our science content tends to be a bit different than the other content that's out there. And so why we do that is because many students hold narrow views of scientists that can affect their sense of belonging and persistence in science. And these views aren't just about appearances, right? It's also how scientists work, right? They think they work alone in a lab, completely isolated from culture. And so Through our work, we're trying to broaden those views because we want to make science a part of everyone's story, where students, especially those from historically excluded groups, see science as accessible, exciting, and relevant to their lives, and teachers have the tools to inspire the next generation of scientists and science enthusiasts. So rather than tell you more about our approach, I thought I would share a film with you today. It's short, it's 10 minutes long. It's called Decoding Ancestral Knowledge, and it's really at the center of the two studies that I'm going to talk about today. So I hope that I can do this without it being too awkward. Okay. Okay. Sounds good?
For me, science is more than something that just asks questions. Science is a mechanism and a tool for me to malama aina, to care for my spaces. Science is how I learn about and connect to my spaces. I didn't become a scientist. I was born a scientist. My kupuna, my ancestors, were natural scientists. So this area of Kauai Nui, Wai is fresh water, Nui is big. So this area is known for its extensive fresh water. These are some of our very, very sacred water sources. All of this water flows through and feeds all different types of agriculture. And then all behind me is what was the lokoi, the fish pond. You have to use a little bit of your imagination right now because it looks like greenery, it looks like vegetation. But in the 1800s, Kauai Nui was said to have the capacity to produce almost 500,000 pounds of fish per year. And it was managed so well from the mountain to the sea that you could literally eat the mud. But the flow of water has been disconnected. Part of that has to do with the fact that the Kailua community has been so developed recently. I felt really strongly that I needed to pursue science as a way to protect these spaces and restore them and bring them back to these spaces of productivity. I left Hawaii because I felt like I needed to learn things to bring back home.
We're currently diving to the deep, dark ocean, and it's very exciting. So we'll catch you on the surface.
I really wanted to use molecular techniques, genetics, to really understand who microbes are and what they're doing in the environment. After being away for almost a decade, that was when I really got rooted back to Hawaii, to my culture, with my language. What I try to do is to use contemporary techniques to decode the layers of meaning in some of our traditional knowledge. Hawaiians had an oral tradition, and so the only way to pass knowledge was through storytelling. So one of my favorite stories is at He'eia Fish Pond, this 800-year-old fish pond, and their kia'i, their steward protector, Her name is Mehan, and she's this fierce mo'ohine. She can take many different forms. We talk about her as a mo'o and a dragon, but she can also take the form of an eel. But she also takes the form of a woman. And they say that her job is to make sure that the fish in the fish pond are well taken care of. Are you mixing the waters? Are you making sure that predators are outside rather than inside? And if you, as stewards, do not do your job to take care of these fish, she has the capacity to hide them from you. They know Meheanu is in the pond when the hau, a canoe plant used for cordage, hibiscus-y like, turns yellow. And they say it turns yellow because she's relieving herself in the back of the pond. When I heard this story, I started thinking, yellow, urine? I wonder if this story has something to do with nitrogen cycling. Nitrogen is one of the most important nutrients in a fish pond, particularly ammonia, which is a form of inorganic nitrogen that's required for the growth of plants, the growth of algae, photosynthetic bacteria that fish like to eat. And so we had this hypothesis, what if when Meheanu's present, right, she pees in the pond, that might be associated with spikes in ammonia. So we set up this great experiment. We sampled over the course of the year, multiple times a week, with the stewards of this space. And every time we had blooms of puahau and the hau was yellow, we would see these spikes in ammonia. Some of those spikes were due to storm flushes from the uplands. So it's bringing down nutrients from the uplands down into the coast. At other times, you would see the pulse of nutrients come from the ocean side. Now, adding to that, we added this layer of microbiology. What we saw is that every time there was this spike in ammonium, we would then see these spikes in these photosynthetic populations, like Synechococcus. And these just happen to be some favored foods of the little baby pua'ama, the little tiny mullet that we're trying to grow. So you can imagine that, Meheanu's coming down, giving a buffet to all her little baby fish, making sure they're big and strong, and the microbial data shows just that. This story lasted 800 years, which means that there's probably still a lot more to decode. But it's really a beautiful lens to think about, what do we observe in our restoration practices moving forward? When there's too much nitrogen in the system, the hau is green. And when there's too little, the hau is green. But when you kind of hit this optimum zone of nitrogen, ammonia, you see all of the puahau blossoming and you have that yellowing. Maybe we also want to, like our ancestors did, plant them strategically to be used as biological indicators for the future. It feels like I've finally come full circle, but now is my deep investigation into this place to transform it back to what it once was, and collaborating with inspiring leaders with vision who lead with aloha. These are the communities that shaped me into being a Hawaiian scientist and a Hawaiian. My family, my ohana, my community, and my mud.
Okay. Sorry, let me just turn that off for a second. So that was decoding ancestral knowledge. Isn't she wonderful? Like, what a nice thing to watch on a Friday. She feels very meditative. Let's get back to the presentation. Okay. So, okay. Now we're going to do some fun interactive breakouts. I know you're probably thinking, no, I just wanted to listen. I don't want to do work. I totally get it. So you don't have to participate if you don't want to. It's just if you want to, I'm providing the option. So what we're going to do is we're going to randomly break out into groups, and then in those groups discuss these two prompts. This video changed my ideas of what it means to be a scientist, agree or disagree, explain. And then what did you learn about what counts as science also from this video? And so Erin is going to share in the chat Google Slides. And on this Google Slides, you're going to see the slide template that has these prompts on it. And so what you're going to do is after you're assigned into your groups, you're going to navigate to that prompt slide and you're going to make a copy for your group. And so each group you're going to want to have a writer. So that's the person that's going to be documenting what the group is discussing. You'll also need a facilitator, and this is, the person that's going to lead the discussion and kind of keep things on time. And then it'd be great to also assign a reporter. So when we come back and we'll do a group share, this person might be called on to share what you guys all talked about. So you have 8 minutes total, so that's roughly 4 minutes per prompt. And I'm just going to have to, I think I'll just stop sharing right now and rely on my lovely hosts to set up those breakout rooms. And again, you don't have to do this. You can opt out. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Let's see. So real quick, does anyone want to share what they discussed in their group? I see some smiles. I looked at some of the slides and I see that many of you disagreed the video changed your views about science, about scientists, which of course, right? You guys are all part of this inclusive science communication network, so totally get it. But any volunteers that want to share?
Is it okay if I just talk out loud?
Yeah.
So we actually, because we kind of thought that, it didn't change our views of what a scientist is, but we reworded the question to how might it change how our students see who scientists are. And I think one thing that we talked about a lot was just how it might help students see how their background can actually be a part of their science, right? It doesn't have to be your humanity, and your community doesn't have to be separate from the science that you do.
That's beautiful. And I loved how you reframed the question, which was perfect for this audience. Does anyone else want to share anything from their group?
Our group talked sort of about the ways that Indigenous ways of knowing and science serve as complements to one another, and that sort of I talked about the principle of two-eyed seeing, which is a term in Indigenous knowledge that talks about using one eye to see the strength from Indigenous ways of knowing and the other eye to see the strengths of Western science, and how like they complement each other and give a more a deep field of view, and that if you close one eye, you are missing part of the picture.
I love that. That's beautiful. Two-eyed seeing. All right, so we are going to move on because we're a little bit pressed for time. So I'm going to share my screen once more. Great. Okay. So thank you all for sharing your insights. Yeah, so we at the Science Communication Lab, we felt we had a really unique opportunity with this film. We were really interested in understanding how this film, a film that's first person, culturally grounded in science, how it could shift students' thinking and representation, who does science, science identity, who belongs in science, or how, students see themselves as science people. And then also nature of science, what counts as science. And why we care about these metrics is that these factors, in particular, science identity, are linked to persistence in STEM, right? So we really care about broadening participation in STEM. And there's already data out there that shows scientist-centered narratives support science identity and nature of science learning, particularly through initiatives like the Scientist Spotlight. If you're familiar with the Scientist Spotlight, they've done a lot of great work on this. And they're wonderful studies, and they've opened up lots of minds and opportunities for studying. But also what's interesting from our perspective is that none of them really focused specifically on film. And so we felt like we had a unique opportunity to ask this question about film. Like, how can a film like this film, lead to certain shifts in how students conceive of science and their sense of belonging in science? And so we did this across two studies that I'm going to talk about today. One is in an undergraduate setting, and the other is in a middle school classroom. And so this is the first study. So we did this in collaboration with Dr. Stephanie Matthews at North Carolina State. And so she assigned for homework to her microbiology students to watch this film. And then immediately afterwards, she had them take a survey. There was a mixture of quantitative and qualitative questions looking at representation, science identity, and nature of science. And so this is the data. And it's actually in the published paper that you can see the citation at the bottom. So you'll recognize this prompt. So we asked this exact prompt in the survey, and 73% of the students agreed that this video changed what it means to be a scientist. And so these are the major themes that emerged from their explanations. Scientists are passionate and personally connected to their work. It countered the white male lab coat stereotype, and scientists' work is influenced by culture. And then finally, Indigenous people are scientists. So scientists can be multidimensional, and they can be influenced by their passions and their cultures. So with regards to science identity, we asked, this video changed how I see myself as a scientist. 65% agreed. And the themes from their explanations are, anyone can be a scientist, including me. I can leverage my passion in my research. My culture and identity belong in science, and science exists in everyday life. So not only can anyone be a scientist, but I can be a scientist and I can bring my whole self into it. Okay, I'm just going to shrink the box. Okay. So finally, with regards to nature of science, what we just asked an open-ended question: what did you learn about how science works? And these are the top 4 themes. Science is a dynamic, iterative process. Science is interdisciplinary and culturally influenced. I learned how traditional knowledge is integrated in science, and I learned how hypotheses are formed and tested. And I think the quote that's on here really summarizes a lot of what the students were learning, which is that hypotheses can be derived from cultural stories and grounded in scientific phenomenon. And so what did we learn from this study? So when students engage in a first-person, culturally grounded science film, we see expanded views on representation, expanded views on science identity, and expanded views on nature of science. But what happens when the film is scaffolded and socially processed in a classroom? What perspective shifts occur? And does this actually translate into action? And so this leads us to our second study. This is hot off the presses. I'm just going to say the study was just done in December and we just got the results 2 weeks ago. So they're very fresh and very preliminary. So bear with me. You guys are the first audience to see this. So wish me luck. No. So in this study, we collaborated with three amazing seventh grade science teachers. They teach a multilingual middle school science class. And what they did was they developed a 3-week nitrogen cycling unit, where the first week they watched the film many times, and then they drew out a model of the oral tradition. In the second week, they did some nitrogen cycling instruction, and they drew out a model of nitrogen cycling. And then in the final week, they overlaid those two models. So they put the nitrogen cycling model on top of their oral tradition model. And so common elements of this unit are repetition. So the teachers had the students repeatedly go back and watch the film multiple times as an anchor throughout the unit. They also gave instruction in both Spanish and English, depending on the proficiency of the students, and that included the video. So the video was also given in Spanish. There was also multimodal activities, hands-on activities, excuse me, including ammonia testing, where, excuse me, where they could see color changes that they could then link to observation. Pardon me. And then the teachers had an explicit identity reflection multiple times throughout the unit, pardon me, and validation of their culture and their language. So this is actually really important that they did this, right? They were validating the students' culture and their language. And so how we captured data is we interviewed the teachers and we asked them specific questions around student outcomes of representation, science identity, and nature of science. Excuse me. And so this is what we saw with regards to representational and science identity shifts. The film-based unit countered the stereotypes of who scientists are. It recognized the role of Indigenous knowledge and culture in science that was personally meaningful to the students. So many of these students actually come from Spanish-speaking countries and they have a lot of Indigenous roots. And so there was an immense amount of cultural pride, pardon me, in the classroom. And then finally, it inspired students to see themselves, their teachers, and their families as scientists. And this just gave me all the good feels. And so what did we see with regards to nature of science shifts? So the unit made scientific methodology more accessible, right? Just start with observation. It also bridged the visible and the invisible through modeling, connecting narrative observation to chemical processes. And it demonstrated how science is a culturally embedded practice. Now, this is the most exciting result to me personally. On top of those shifts that we saw with perspectives, we also see a shift in participation. We see increased engagement and participation. The unit reduced fear of failure and increased academic risk-taking. Students were more willing to dive into doing science. They were more willing to speak English. They performed at the highest levels on district assessments. And so what that tells us is that when teachers intentionally scaffolded discussion, modeling, and cultural validation, those perspective shifts, right, with their representation, science identity, and nature of science became behavioral. And I just want to share this one quote because this quote I just love so much. So this is one of the teachers. Technically, the law of conservation of matter is an 8th grade standard. We completely restructured the way we taught these standards because we were just so freaking excited about this video. And we were just so taken by the way it connected in terms of science education, identity, or the work that we do. It hit us all in different ways. And that's why we redid all of this. And the bright note is we have data showing that our kids are strongest in the district in those 3 areas for those standards. So just to kind of reiterate, the teachers saw the film. They had their own internal shifts in how they define science and who participates in it. And as a result, they restructured their entire year's curriculum to fit this 3-week unit into their curriculum, even though it wasn't part of their grades standards. So that's huge, right? And this also got us thinking about, oh my gosh, we have been focused on student outcomes, but we should also be thinking about teachers. What are the shifts in perspectives that teachers are having that are leading to changes in classroom practices that are then leading to shifts in students' behaviors? And so with that, I'm just going to summarize these 2 studies. So going back to our original research question, when students engage in first-person culturally grounded science film, we see shifts in representation, science identity, and nature of science. And when the films are contextualized through social processing, modeling, and cultural validation, we also see shifts in participation, right? So those perspective shifts gets translated into action. And so I'm going to stop here and have you do another breakout where you can do your own social processing if you want to. You're again going to discuss, you're going to break into groups again, and you're going to discuss these 2 prompts. What lessons did you learn about how we can engage students or audiences in science stories? And how can we equip students to become science storytellers? And so the same instructions apply. You're going to want to, okay, I just stopped sharing. You're going to want to navigate to the session 2 prompt slide and then make a copy of that and record your responses. I know we're running out of time, so we're only going to give you 5 minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. It's always a little disorienting to be ripped out of a breakout room in the middle of conversation. Real quick, does anyone want to share what they discussed in their breakout room?
I think I'll share one point. One of the things that we kind of touched on at the very end as we were being, as you mentioned, ripped out of the room, when we talk about equipping students to be storytellers or be more comfortable as storytellers themselves, is actually helping them to be comfortable with being like with not being correct. Because I think a major part of storytelling in science is that there is going to be a level of inaccuracy because the story isn't exactly what the science is. But nonetheless, if you can get someone to have an understanding of science by creating an anecdote about a particular scientific phenomena, I think that helps people to become a bit more comfortable because the students who are usually super focused on accuracy, they sometimes struggle, I think, even with that idea of storytelling because they're like, but that's not what happens.
I love that. It really speaks about this fear of failure, right? We think that, as science communicators, we have to be experts and we have to have the right answers. And many times we don't. So that's such a wonderful insight. Does any other group want to share?
In our group, Jamie was sharing about how engaging students in the relationship between their identities and the science has like not only helped them be more engaged, but also helped them like learn the content better, and then like equipping our students to then know the ways that they can use their identities to help transmit the message of science to others is a really cool thing. And we sort of talked about teaching our students that they don't have to like check their identities at the door when they do science, and in fact they'll be better sort of spokespeople for science when they use the strength of those identities.
Yes, love that. Paulina, I saw you were about to speak.
Yes, I'm on the same group of the group 2, and I didn't have the time to share this on the breakout room, but I would say that reading a lot, that would equip them to share the story in different ways. Even if they are not exposed to other cultures or identities, reading, it can bring that knowledge of other realities, and they can fit their own ways of telling their stories.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, I know I want to leave time for Q&A, and I just had one slide. So I think I'll just say it rather than share it to save time. So I, as a science communicator, what I'm learning from this, and again, with the caveat that this is quite preliminary and it's also looking at short-term effects, not long-term. But what I learned is that first-person science stories can reposition who belongs in science and how people participate. But it's really about context, right? That the narrative effects can be amplified or constrained by the social context in which they are processed. And so if we want science communication to shift towards participation, we must design not only compelling stories, but meaningful spaces for them to be interpreted. And so that's one of the many takeaways I have for that. But I just want to thank you all so much for being here. And I can share with the SCERN network my contact information. So if anyone has any further questions that you don't want to address here, I can certainly do that. But I definitely encourage you to go to our website, sciencecommunicationlab.org. You can access our films for free, and there's teaching resources. So all you need is an educator login, which is free. And so with that, I'm going to pass over the Q&A to Erin.
Thank you so much. We are going to start our Q&A portion. We are going to drop a link in a chat to folks if you want to sort of list some questions that you have. That way, if we don't have a chance to get to all of them with the time that we have left, we can share that list with Shannon, who can then answer our questions, and then we'll make sure that that's attached with the recording of today's talk for you all to see later and get sent out to you as well. So feel free to drop questions in the link in the chat or ask your questions out loud.
I would love to ask a question. I'm wearing two hats today. I work as a science communicator for the Global Science of Learning Education Network in the US, but I'm also the co-founder of I'm from Chile, from a Chilean initiative that we make female scientists more visible to create role models for other generations. And I like that you mentioned the context, how important context is for these experiments to work. And I was asking Sarah in our group if I imagine that if you have used the same video with other group of students, it wouldn't have the same impact. And this maybe has that impact, that big impact, because they were from Latin American countries and also from the US and with indigenous backgrounds or cultural ancestors. How would you expect to change if the group would have been different?
That is such a great question. Just for context, Sarah Goodwin, who's in this talk right now, she's the executive director of the Science Communication Lab. So hello, Sarah. Thanks for being here. Yes, I think there's definitely going to be differences across different groups, right? But what is interesting is just within these two studies, these are two very different groups of students, right? They're different age levels, but also in North Carolina State, in that classroom in particular, it's very white, it's very rural or semi-rural. And so that is very different demographics, at least, physical identities than the identities of the multilingual classroom. So, which is, lots of children of color, a lot of Spanish-speaking kids. And so the film seemed to resonate with both of them quite well, and they were able to identify with Kiana for different ways, but also related. So for the North Carolina State study, those students, they really resonated with her passion for her community. So many of them come from small towns, and so they immediately saw the connection to their passion and their love for their own community and wanting to use science to support their community and thinking about some of the old wives' tales that got passed down in their families. And so, although it didn't have quite the cultural pride, there was this deep connection for community that I think resonates across a lot of different kinds of students. And I also think it really speaks to the fact that, I mean, yes, diverse representation is so important, and it's so important that we elevate all these different types of identities, but it also shows that you don't have to share the same physical identity of the speaker or the storyteller for it to be relatable. And actually, we've done some other research on that that shows that people of all different kinds of identities can relate, and they relate to things non-physical, like their sense of humor, or their turns, like how they phrase things, or things like that. So it's really about capturing the full breadth of who human beings are.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have a question from the Google Dot. Do you have any thoughts on integrating lessons on science communication alongside the documentaries produced by your group? They say they think it could be a really powerful tool in modeling sort of SciComm outside what people normally get taught.
Oh, that is such a good question. I have to admit, I hadn't really thought about that. Years ago, we used to do a lot of science communication training, and we would use examples. But now in reflecting back on it, I would redo all of it. I would redo all the instruction that we did, and really, yeah, and especially if we're using lessons learned from this film with Kiana of just like really centering identity, and not being afraid to show who you are and how your work is infused in you, and vice versa. So, but that is a really great idea. And so, yeah, I would love to connect with whoever had that question to kind of dig into it further.
Alrighty, we are right up against time, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any more questions. I'm gonna really quick share my screen one last time. Thank you all so much for being here today on a probably very busy Friday for many people with this time of year. The network is so excited to bring in more researchers and practitioners as our talk series continues, so feel free to share this event with anyone who might be interested. Our next talk will be on Friday, March 27th, and we'll hear from Dr. Jenny Dower, who's a professor of science literacy at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her talk is entitled Developing Student Science Civic Engagement Through Experiential Learning in an Issues-Based Course. Remember that if you would like to be added to our email notifications of network events, you can follow, the QR code and link right here, and we would be happy to add you to our list. Everybody, I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you all again so much for being here.